A whisper in the dark. Imagine this. Night has fallen over a quiet valley. The village sleeps, the last candles have burned low. Outside, the wind brushes through the trees, and the moon spills silver light across the grass. In the distance, just at the edge of the forest, where no one dares to go alone, a faint glow shimmers between the trees. Your grandmother once told you, "Don't walk near the old mound at night. That's where they dance. That's where they live." Elves, not the cute, toy-making helpers you see at Christmas, not the tall, noble warriors with perfect cheekbones from fantasy films, but something far older, stranger, more powerful, and more mysterious. Tonight, let's walk into that forest together. In this story, we'll travel from the ancient Norse and Germanic world, through Celtic lands, through the Middle Ages, into Victorian fairy tales, and finally into the modern age of fantasy, to answer one simple, haunting question. What are elves? The first shadows of elves. Long before the word elf sounded like magic from a movie, there were people living in cold northern lands who feared the dark and honoured unseen spirits. According to scholars like John Lindow, who wrote Norse Mythology, a guide to the gods, heroes, rituals and beliefs, the idea of elves appears deeply rooted in the Germanic and Norse world, long before Christianity arrived in the north. These early people believed the world was full of invisible beings, gods, giants, spirits of the land, and among them the Álfar, elves. In Old Norse they called them Álfar, and in Old English they spoke of Álf. Back then, elves were not soft and sweet. They were dangerous, beautiful and powerful. They could heal, but they could also harm. They were not simply good or evil, they were something else, otherworldly. This is important. Elves were originally not created as fantasy characters. They were part of how people explained the world around them. A strange sickness, sudden pain with no visible cause, odd dreams, mysterious blessings, unexpected luck. Sometimes people would say the elves did this. According to the scholar Rudolf Simic in his Dictionary of Northern Mythology, elves belonged to a broad family of beings that existed between humans and gods. Neither fully divine nor fully mortal. Not entirely trustworthy, but not always wicked. Elves were part of the unseen structure of reality. The world of Norse elves. Now picture the Viking Age. Longhouses, roaring fires, ships cutting through icy seas, and skalds, poets, telling stories of gods and heroes. Among those stories were quiet hints about the Álfar. Our main written sources for Norse myths, like Snorri Sturluson's prose Edda, speak of Ljósálfar and Dökkálfar, light elves and dark elves. Snorri tells us that light elves live in Alfheimr, a realm of light and beauty. They are fairer than the sun, radiant and graceful. Dark elves, on the other hand, live under the earth, in a place of shadow. Some modern scholars, like Kevin Crossley Holland and Neil Price, point out that these categories might not always have been clear in older oral traditions. But Snorri's description gives us a strong image. Elves of light above, elves of darkness below. In Norse tradition, elves were connected to fertility, the health of crops, and life energy. They might sometimes be honoured in rituals alongside the Vanir gods, like Frey, a god of fertility and prosperity. In fact, some traditions say that Frey is a ruler of the elves, or closely linked to them. So in this world, elves are shining spirits of nature, but also mysterious and not entirely safe. According to archaeologists and historians like Neil Price, in his book Children of Ash and Elm, there may have been actual rituals or offerings made to these beings, at sacred groves, burial mounds, or special sites in nature. People would leave food or drink, hoping for protection and blessings. Imagine standing in a silent forest clearing, placing a piece of bread, a cup of ale, or a carved gift on a stone, whispering a wish into the dark. You might not see the elves, but you believed they were there. Elves and humans, danger and desire. Elves may have been distant, otherworldly beings, but in stories they often came dangerously close to human lives. Some later Scandinavian folktales, studied by scholars like Terry Gunnell, describe elf women as incredibly beautiful, but also risky. A man walking alone might encounter one in the hills or by the water. She might offer him music, dance or love, but if he followed her too far, he might become lost, vanish, or fall ill. Elves could, lure humans into dances until their feet bled and their strength was gone, cause madness or strange behavior, steal time. A short dance with elves could feel like minutes but turn out to be years in the human world. In Old English charm texts, there are references to elfsiden or elf-shot, the idea that sudden sharp pain or sickness might be caused by unseen darts from elves. People believed that some illnesses and curses came from them. So early elves were not the tame fantasy race we know today. They were powerful spirits of desire, danger and mystery, living at the edges of human experience. Celtic lands and the fair folk. Now let's shift the scene. We travel from the icy north of Scandinavia to the green hills and misty valleys of Ireland, Scotland and Wales. Celtic lands where people told stories not about elves in the Norse sense, but about the Side, the fair folk, or the people of the mounds. While the word elf comes from the Germanic side, many modern ideas we associate with elves blend with Celtic fairy lore. According to folklore scholars like Jacqueline Simpson and Catherine Briggs, the Celtic fairy host and the Germanic elves share many similarities. They live in mounds, hills, or under the earth. They are beautiful, often shining. They can be kind or cruel, helpful or deadly. They love music, dancing, and stealing people away. In Ireland, the Aosí, the people of the fairy mounds, are sometimes thought of as ancient gods or noble families who went underground when humans took over the surface world. They are powerful, dangerous, and demand respect. While technically not the same as Norse Álfar, these beings became intertwined in the imagination of later Europeans. Over time, especially when English speakers learned about Celtic stories, the word elf and the idea of fairies started to merge. We begin to see an image forming. Small, beautiful, magical beings who live in hills, dance at night, steal humans away, and must be treated very carefully. Christianity, demons, and downgrading the elves. As Europe slowly converted to Christianity, the old beliefs in elves and similar beings did not simply disappear. Instead, they were reinterpreted. According to scholars like Rudolf Simek and John Lindow, Christian monks and writers began to reshape the old stories. Some elves were recast as demons or fallen angels. Others were described as tricks of the devil, leading people away from God. Some were pushed into the category of mere superstition. In medieval texts, you might see references to elves alongside demons, witches, or unclean spirits. The Church often discouraged people from making offerings or having dealings with these beings. At the same time, some beliefs blended into folk Christianity. People might go to church on Sunday, but still whisper charms against elf-shot, or still avoid certain hills at night because the good people, or elves or fairies, were said to live there. Over time, elves were downgraded, in a sense, from powerful quasi-divine nature spirits to folk beings, fairies, or even mischievous imps. But they never truly disappeared. They simply changed shape. Elves as fairies. The shrinking of a race. By the late Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, elves and fairies began to merge more clearly in the popular imagination in parts of Europe, especially in England. One of the most famous early literary appearances of elves is in William Shakespeare's plays, like A Midsummer Night's Dream, where we meet characters like Puck, Oberon, and Titania, fairy king and queen, surrounded by a host of small magical beings. In this world, elves are playful, mischievous, often small, deeply tied to nature and love and dreams. The serious, dangerous, semi-divine elves of the Viking Age are now becoming something else, the charming, whimsical, sometimes comic fairies and elves of literature. Folklore researchers like Jacqueline Simpson and Diane Purkis have shown how, during the early modern period, fairies became a kind of safe outlet for talking about the mysterious and the magical in a Christian society. You could tell stories about fairies and elves without openly praising old pagan gods. However, even in these lighter depictions, something of the old danger remained. They could still kidnap humans, especially children. They could cast spells. They often expected respect. Breaking their rules could lead to misfortune. The Victorians and the sweetening of elves. Then came the 19th century, the Victorian era. This is where elves and fairies truly changed shape in the public imagination. During this time, artists and writers in Britain and Europe developed a passion for romantic, sentimental, and cute images of fairies and elves. Tiny, winged creatures dancing on flowers, living in mushroom rings. Children's storybook illustrations. According to modern historians of folklore, the Victorians loved to decorate books, cards and paintings with charming fairy imagery, and elves were often included in this soft, delicate aesthetic. In this process, the older, darker elf, tied to sickness, death and otherworldly power, was smoothly transformed into something safer for children and polite society. Little house elves, toy makers, Christmas elves helping Santa. But even then, some writers remembered the deeper roots. One of the most important voices in this transformation was J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien and the rebirth of the High Elf. The scene shifts now to the 20th century. A quiet academic at Oxford University, deeply immersed in old languages, myths and legends, spends his nights inventing new worlds. His name is J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien read Old Norse, Old English and medieval texts, and he knew very well that elves were once powerful and mysterious beings. In his famous essay on fairy stories, he talks about fairy not just as a little winged creature, but as a realm of enchantment, a whole other world. So when Tolkien created Middle-earth, he decided to restore elves to their ancient dignity. Tall, beautiful and wise, deeply connected to nature and magic, almost immortal, carrying deep sorrow and long memory, living in realms like Rivendell and Lothlorien. These elves are not tiny sprites. They are more like a blend of the noble, bright Norse light elves, the mysterious Celtic otherworld people, and Tolkien's own Christian and philosophical views about mortality, loss and beauty. Because Tolkien's work, especially The Lord of the Rings, became incredibly influential, his image of elves spread around the world. Modern fantasy literature, films and games picked up his version and carried it forward. Now, when many people think of elves, they imagine tall, graceful warriors with bows and swords, pointed ears, amazing beauty and skill, forest cities and hidden kingdoms. Tolkien, drawing from ancient sources and academic knowledge, rebuilt the elf, and the modern world accepted his version almost as the standard model. Modern elves, games, movies and magic. From Tolkien's work came a whole flood of modern fantasy. Dungeons and Dragons, countless fantasy novels, video games, films and TV series. In many of these, elves are a fantasy race, like humans, dwarves or orcs, distinguished by their beauty, long life, high magic and pointed ears, often associated with forests, archery and wisdom. In some settings, you have different kinds of elves. Wood elves, wilder, tied to forests. High elves, refined and magical, connected to great cities and learning. Dark elves, living underground, linked to shadows or forbidden magic. These divisions echo the old light versus dark elf idea from Norse mythology, but reimagined in new ways. So, in the modern world, if you ask what are elves, many people will answer they're a magical race in fantasy stories, like in The Lord of the Rings or The Elder Scrolls or various games. But behind those games and movies lies an ancient line of belief stretching back over 1,000 years. What were elves originally? So now we come to the heart of the question. When we strip away Santa's helpers, Tolkien's warriors and cutesy Christmas cartoons, what were elves originally? Based on the work of scholars like John Lindo, Rudolf Simek, Neil Price, Jacqueline Simpson, and the ancient texts like Snorri's Prose Edda and Old English charms, we can say, elves began as powerful otherworldly beings, neither fully gods nor humans, connected to nature, fertility, health, and sometimes death. They were invisible but real in people's belief systems, used to explain mysterious illnesses, sudden pains, strange experiences. People performed rituals and gave offerings to seek their help or avoid their anger. They were morally ambiguous, not fully good or evil, capable of great gifts and great harm. They slowly merged with other supernatural beings, especially with fairies in the British Isles, creating the mixed rich world of the fair folk. Christianity changed their image, sometimes demonizing them, sometimes pushing them into folk stories instead of religion. Literature reshaped them from Shakespeare's playful fairies to Victorian flower children. Then Tolkien resurrected them as grand, noble beings again. So when we say elves today, we are speaking a word that carries the fear of Viking farmers, the beauty of Celtic fairy queens, the warnings of medieval priests, the whimsy of Victorian art, and the heroism of Tolkien's Middle-earth all at once. Elves in the human imagination. But there is a deeper layer. Why did humans create the idea of elves in the first place? Scholars like Tolkien himself, in On Fairy Stories, suggest that elves and fairies emerge because humans sense there is more to the world than what the eye sees. The feeling that the forest is watching you. The sense that certain places are sacred or dangerous. The mystery of dreams or inspiration that seems to come from nowhere. Elves became a way to give shape to the unseen. The beauty of nature turned into shining beings. The danger of the unknown turned into seductive or threatening spirits. The longing for something beyond ordinary life turned into immortal, magical folk. From this angle, elves are not just monsters or races in fantasy games. They are symbols. They represent the part of nature that is beyond human control, the idea of immortality and the sorrow that may come with it, the tension between the human world and the other world. In this sense, elves never truly came from a single moment. They were grown over centuries, as different cultures layered their fears, hopes and dreams onto them. Now, you might think elves are just fiction, but in some parts of the world, especially in Iceland, there are still stories, and sometimes even local customs, that show a lingering respect for hidden folk. Modern writers and journalists have reported that some Icelandic people prefer not to disturb certain rocks or hills said to be homes of huldufolk, hidden people. While beliefs vary, and not everyone takes it literally, it shows something powerful. Even in our age of technology, the idea that someone else might be living unseen beside us has not completely died. Elves have moved into our movies, games, novels, art, but they also remain in little whispers of superstition, in folk tales told to children, in creative works that imagine them as allies, enemies, or reflections of us. Who are elves? So now, after travelling across centuries and countries, we come back to our question. What are elves? Based on the long story we've walked through together, we might answer, elves are ancient mirrors of human imagination. Powerful, beautiful, dangerous, mysterious beings who've changed shape many times, but always stayed just beyond our reach. To the Norse and early Germanic peoples, they were spirits of power, linked to fate, health and sacred places. To the Celtic storytellers, their cousins were the fairfolk, the hidden people in the hills. To medieval Christians, they became suspect, sometimes demonic, sometimes dismissed, yet surviving in folk belief. To Shakespeare and Victorian artists, they turned into playful, tiny, enchanting fairies. To Tolkien and modern fantasy, they rose again as noble, immortal beings, tragic and glorious. And today, they live wherever stories are told. In films, in role-playing games, in novels, in your own imagination. The light in the forest. We return at last to that quiet valley. The night is deep, the moonlight is bright. At the edge of the forest you see a flicker of light. Then another. You hear a sound, like distant laughter, or music that feels both joyful and sad. You cannot see them clearly, but you feel that if you step just a little further, if you crossed that invisible line between the human world and the other world, you might see a face. Beautiful and strange, older than your entire civilization, watching you with eyes full of secrets. Elves, in the end, are that moment. The moment when you sense that the world is deeper, stranger, and more enchanted than it appears. So, the next time you hear the word elf, whether in a Christmas movie, a fantasy game, or a mythological documentary, remember, behind that single word lies a long, winding, shimmering history. From ancient Norse priests and poets, to Celtic bards, to medieval monks, to Victorian artists, to Tolkien, to you, listening now. And somewhere, in the stories we tell, and the forests we walk past without entering, they are still dancing.